The last 2 weeks of Matt Sutter's life were a descent few saw coming, hidden behind silence, shadowed by secrets, and sealed by a system that failed him at every turn. He was once the golden boy of rural Ohio, a robotics prodigy, MIT scholar, the kind of mind people said would change the world. But when the headlines stopped, so did the help. What followed was a downward spiral through grief, addiction, and invisibility. Until one freezing December night, when Matt was found alone in an alley, a syringe in his hand and a blueprint in his pocket. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. Could it have been prevented? Did the institutions that once praised his genius silently pave the road to his fall? And how many other gifted lives are quietly unraveling right now? Unseen, unheard, and untreated. Strap in. This is the story of brilliance buried by pressure, of warning signs ignored, and a final question that still haunts everyone who knew him. Could we have saved Matt Stter? In the heart of rural Ohio, where wheat fields ripple like golden oceans, beneath a boundless sky, a boy named Matt Stter was quietly becoming a legend. Long before MIT ever called his name, Matt was already something of a phenomenon. Neighbors spoke in hushed admiration about the child who could disassemble a lawnmower before he could ride a bike. Teachers called him a marvel, curious, relentless, and years ahead of his peers. But beyond the accolades and small-town awe was a boy driven not by recognition, but by wonder. His backyard was his lab, filled with makeshift inventions fashioned from soda cans, duct tape, and salvaged electronics, cardboard rockets, rainwater harvesters, air cleaning machines, each idea more ambitious than the last. It was clear to everyone. Matt wasn't just gifted, he was different. As his fame grew locally, so did the expectations. School boards highlighted him in district brochures. He was pushed into science fairs, robotics teams, scholarship competitions. And while most kids played baseball, Matt was writing code that could teach a toy robot to dance. But even at this early stage, something else was brewing beneath the brilliance. A quiet pressure, a constant, gnawing question that would follow him into every phase of his life. What happens when being gifted becomes your only identity? When Matt Stter stepped onto the campus of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he wasn't just a freshman. He was a prodigy, carrying the weight of an entire community's pride. Hailed as the golden boy from Ohio, Matt's full ride. Scholarship was the stuff of local legend. But inside the hallowed halls of MIT, surrounded by some of the brightest minds in the world, Matt's confidence began to falter. Here, brilliance wasn't rare. It was the baseline. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the smartest person in the room. He was one of hundreds, and the pressure to keep up was suffocating. What started as excitement quickly morphed into anxiety. Matt threw himself into complex coursework, robotic systems, electrical engineering, AI modeling. Subjects that had once thrilled him now felt like battles for survival. He stayed up for nights on end, obsessively perfecting code, running simulations, chasing an invisible standard of perfection. The once vibrant spark in his eyes dulled under fluorescent lights and relentless deadlines. While others formed study groups and leaned on each other for support, Matt withdrew, choosing solitude over collaboration, silence over vulnerability. According to campus mental health data, over 40% of MIT students report symptoms of depression or overwhelming anxiety during their time there, a reality that Matt quietly slipped into. Panic attacks began creeping in like shadows, uninvited and unrelenting. He would sit in lecture halls, paralyzed by fear, unable to breathe, consumed by the thought that he was one wrong answer away from total collapse. But to those on the outside, Matt looked fine. He wore the same bright smile, gave the same confident presentations, and continued to earn top grades. No one suspected that behind the genius was a young man slowly unraveling. And in the silence of his dorm room, surrounded by awards and unfinished projects, Matt asked himself a question that haunted him more than any exam ever could. What if I'm not enough? By the time Matt Stter entered his sophomore year at MIT, the cracks in his perfect facade had widened into canyons. But it wasn't academics that finally broke him. It was grief. The sudden death of his father, the man who had cheered him on at every science fair, every robotics meet, shattered the last emotional anchor Matt had. What had already been a slow spiral into anxiety now plunged into something far darker. Friends noticed his absence from club meetings. Professors saw late assignments, and classmates whispered about the once star student who was now barely holding it together. But no one truly understood the depth of the loss Matt carried, or the quiet storm it unleashed. In the days following his father's passing, Matt did what he always did. He buried himself in work. He told himself that productivity would heal him, that if he just kept moving forward, the pain wouldn't catch up. But it did, and when the insomnia and panic attacks became unbearable, Matt turned to something he thought he could control: prescription pills. What started as a way to manage anxiety and get a few hours of sleep evolved into something far more dangerous. The medications numbed his grief, dulled his racing thoughts, and gave him a temporary escape from the crushing expectations still clinging to his shoulders. But as the dosage increased, so did the consequences. His grades began to slip. Group projects fell apart. He missed meetings and deadlines. And yet, when friends asked how he was doing, he gave the same polished answer: "I'm fine." In reality, he was anything but. The once celebrated inventor was now drowning in silence, trapped in a body that couldn't rest and a mind that couldn't escape. And still, no one intervened. No one stopped to ask the question that could have changed everything. Are you really okay? Behind the closed doors of his dorm room, Matt was no longer building the future. He was barely surviving the present. And as his world began to crumble, one pill at a time, no one realized just how close he was to vanishing entirely. The line between coping and addiction is razor thin. And for Matt Stter, it vanished the moment he left MIT on medical leave. What was supposed to be a temporary pause to regroup became a downward spiral no one could stop. Back in Ohio, far from the academic battlefield but no closer to peace, Matt sought out work to stay afloat, eventually landing a physically demanding job on a local construction site. For a while, the routine helped. The long hours and hard labor offered a distraction. But then came the accident. A fall from scaffolding left him with a shattered leg and a prescription for painkillers, an all-too-familiar escape with a new justification. The opioids came in orange bottles with neat labels, but what they unleashed was anything but orderly. Within weeks, Matt was back where he'd been in Boston. But this time, the stakes were even higher. The pain was real, the dependency stronger, and the warning signs easier to ignore. In a country where over 80,000 people died of opioid-related overdoses in a single year, Matt became another invisible casualty in a crisis too big for headlines and too slow for outrage. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't reckless. He was in pain. And like so many others, he trusted that what came from a pharmacy couldn't possibly destroy him. But destroy it did. Slowly, then all at once. He stopped showing up to work. He began selling his tech equipment to pay for refills. His mother, who once displayed his robotics trophies on the mantle, now kept watch over his room like a nurse, terrified of what she might find. The Matt who once dreamed of saving the world was now trying to save himself from a drug that promised comfort and delivered chaos. And the most chilling part? No one came looking. The same institutions that once showcased his brilliance, the school board, the scholarship committees, the university itself, remained silent. There were no phone calls, no follow-ups, just a fading name on an alumni list and a prescription bottle that kept being refilled. What no one realized at the time was this: Matt wasn't just slipping through the cracks, he was being swallowed by a system that applauds achievement but punishes vulnerability. And as he fell deeper into the grip of addiction, the world that once lifted him up simply looked away. By the time Matt Stter turned 26, he had become nearly unrecognizable, even to himself. The once celebrated inventor, the scholarship genius from rural Ohio, had vanished without so much as a headline. In his place was a gaunt figure haunting the edges of society, drifting between shelters, alleys, and bus terminals. For a while, people thought he had moved abroad, maybe working in tech somewhere in Europe. But the truth was far more devastating. Matt was homeless, another casualty of a system that couldn't see past his resume. Beneath overpasses and inside abandoned buildings, Matt became known not by his name, but by stories whispered among the unhoused. The guy who solved equations in his sleep. The one who built a solar charger out of scrap metal. On more than one occasion, social workers reported finding engineering sketches on napkins, complex algorithms scrawled on the backs of receipts, remnants of a mind that had not stopped creating even as the rest of him unraveled. But no amount of brilliance could protect him from the harshness of the streets. Cold winters gnawed at his bones, missed meals left him frail. The shame of being the fallen genius kept him from reaching out, even as he spiraled deeper into addiction and isolation. Back home, his mother was pawning off the last family heirlooms to cover his mounting debts. Debts from ER visits, short-lived rehabs, and medications that offered more risk than relief. She stopped hanging his awards on the wall and instead kept them in a box, too painful to look at. Friends from MIT tried calling at first, then they stopped. One by one, the world moved on, writing Matt off as a lost cause, a sad footnote in an otherwise successful graduating class. But here's the haunting part. Matt was still trying. He would show up at libraries, ask for job listings, volunteer at shelters when sober. There were moments of clarity, of hunger to rebuild. But those moments were fleeting. The street is not a place for healing, it's a place for surviving. And even survival came with a steep cost. Every missed opportunity, every closed door became another nail in the coffin of his former self. Still, in the shadows of the city, a few held on to hope. A community nurse recalled seeing Matt with a makeshift prosthetic rig he designed to ease his chronic leg pain. A librarian remembered the boy who used to draw drone schematics next to homeless men playing cards. These glimpses, though brief, told a story no one else was watching, that somewhere deep inside, Matt hadn't fully given up. But even the strongest spark dims in the dark. And with no home, no income, and no consistent care, Matt's brilliance became a ghost, visible only to those who knew where to look. It was the coldest night of the year when Matt Sutter's story reached its quiet, devastating climax. December winds whipped through the city streets like razors, slicing through even the thickest coats, though Matt didn't have one. What he wore was a fraying jacket patched with duct tape and hope, his shoes soaked through from hours of wandering. Earlier that day, he had shown up at a free clinic, exhausted, trembling, his speech slow and eyes vacant. The nurse at the front desk recognized him from months ago. She said his name softly. He didn't respond. The clinic was overrun. Flu season had brought a surge of patients, and with limited beds, the staff could only direct him to a nearby shelter. But the shelter was full. The next available bed wouldn't open until the following evening. Matt nodded and left without protest. No complaint, no anger, just quiet resignation. He had been through this cycle before. As the hours ticked by, Matt wandered the downtown district, ducking into train stations and alleyways to escape the wind. Around 2 a.m., he found a narrow passage between two brick buildings, a space barely wide enough to lie down. It was dry, dimly lit, and for the moment, hidden. There, he sat down, shivering against the wall, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in plastic. Inside was a syringe. For Matt, it wasn't about getting high anymore. It was about survival, about silencing the pain in his leg, the tremors in his hands, the endless echoing grief that never left. No one saw him inject. No one walked past to notice. By sunrise, his body was still. The coroner's report later cited an overdose of synthetic opioids, compounded by hypothermia. But to those who knew Matt, truly knew him, it wasn't the drugs that killed him. It was the years of silence, the systems that failed to follow up, the peers who assumed he'd bounce back, the institutions that valued his mind but not his well-being, the city that had a dozen empty buildings but no room for him. And yet, in that alley, something else remained. Clutched in Matt's hand was a folded paper, a diagram, a blueprint for a wind-powered water purification system. Even in his final hours, his mind was still trying to solve problems, still trying to build something that might help someone else. It was the last gift of a boy who once dreamed of saving the world and who spent his final night alone in the shadows of a society that forgot how to care. News of Matt Sster's death didn't make national headlines. There was no viral video, no trending hashtag. But in the communities that had once celebrated him, from the quiet streets of his hometown in Ohio to the ivy-covered halls of MIT, the shock was seismic. Word spread fast. Former teachers wept. Robotics teammates stared blankly at group chat messages, wondering how no one had seen this coming. Professors posted somber tributes, calling him brilliant and compassionate. But beneath the condolences, a bitter undercurrent surged. Blame. Finger-pointing began almost immediately. Some placed it squarely on MIT, citing the school's notorious pressure cooker environment and historically high rates of student anxiety and depression. Mental health advocates resurfaced old student petitions demanding more accessible counseling, smaller class loads, and early intervention protocols. Alumni forums lit up with testimonials from students who said they too had nearly cracked under the same relentless drive for excellence. One anonymous comment read, "Matt's story isn't unique. It's just the one that ended in the alley instead of the ER." Others blamed the healthcare system, a system that handed out opioids more readily than therapy referrals. Investigations later revealed Matt had been prescribed painkillers by at least 4 different providers in less than a year. No one had checked his history. No one had flagged the frequency. Local journalists unearthed reports that several nearby clinics were operating under relaxed oversight, funneling patients through brief consults with little follow-up. In a damning editorial, a state health official called Matt's death preventable and emblematic of a deeper rot. But the most uncomfortable truths came from those closest to him. Friends who admitted they noticed Matt pulling away but didn't ask. Peers who assumed he was just busy. Mentors who mistook his silence for independence. Even his mother, who had fought to keep him afloat, quietly asked herself whether she should have pushed harder, called more, taken him out of school the moment his father died. Regret echoed like a drumbeat through every eulogy, every whispered conversation at the funeral. The community's grief took many forms: guilt, outrage, denial, but all of it circled the same aching question: how did we let this happen? Matt had once been the embodiment of hope, a living testament to talent, discipline, and vision. And yet, beneath it all, he had been breaking, and no one saw. Or worse, some did, but didn't know what to do. What emerged wasn't just a tragedy, it was a reckoning. A reckoning for schools that prioritize prestige over student safety, for medical systems that treat symptoms but not souls, for communities that celebrate genius but fall silent when that genius begins to suffer, and for all of us, a chilling reminder that brilliance can burn out in the dark, far from the spotlight that once made it shine. In the months following Matt Stetter's death, something unexpected began to emerge, not from the institutions that failed him, but from the people left behind. His mother, once overwhelmed by grief and debt, began organizing Matt's scattered notebooks, journals, and napkin sketches. What she found stunned her. Dozens of blueprints, technical drawings, and theoretical models. From sustainable energy grids to low-cost water filtration systems, Matt had kept inventing. Even when the IGI world had stopped watching. These weren't the scribbles of a broken man, they were the seeds of ideas that could still change lives. With help from a few of Matt's former MIT classmates, she founded the Matt Stter Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting young innovators struggling with mental health challenges. The foundation launched with two clear missions: fund mental health resources at technical universities and provide scholarships that paired academic achievement with emotional support systems. No one should have to choose between their dreams and their well-being. The foundation's website reads, "A quiet indictment of the very culture that celebrated Matt's genius but ignored his pain." MIT responded too, albeit more cautiously. The university announced a new mental health initiative, citing Matt's story without naming him directly. It included peer-led support groups, mandatory wellness training for faculty, and a revised academic counseling program designed to flag students at risk. Critics called the response too little, too late, but others saw it as a rare institutional acknowledgement of a systemic failure. Meanwhile, Matt's story spread, not as a cautionary tale, but as a movement. Engineering. Blogs featured his early drone designs. Environmental nonprofits began prototyping one of his rain harvesting concepts. A group of high school students in rural Illinois used one of Matt's diagrams to build a wind-powered generator for their school's greenhouse, citing him as their inspiration. Even in death, his mind was still at work. Still giving, still building, still dreaming. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was personal. Friends who once avoided difficult conversations started speaking openly about anxiety, burnout, and loss. Teachers began rethinking how they define success. Parents started asking deeper questions when their children said they were fine. What Matt left behind wasn't just a trail of what could have beens, it was a blueprint for how we treat those who fall through the cracks. Matt Stter never got to build the future he imagined, but in the aftermath of his absence, a different kind of invention was born. One rooted not in circuits or code, but in compassion, connection, and the courage to say, we can do better. Matt Stur's story is not just about a brilliant mind. Lost too soon, it's about the cracks in our culture that swallow people whole while the rest of us keep clapping for success. It's about a system that equates value with output, a society that applauds ambition but mutes the quiet cries for help behind closed doors. Matt didn't fail. We did, and unless we're willing to face that truth, he won't be the last. If you're watching this and thinking of someone who's been pulling away, who seems off but keeps insisting they're fine, reach out. Don't wait for a crisis. Don't assume someone else is checking in. Be the one. If you're a student juggling expectations that feel impossible, know this: asking for help is not weakness, it's strength, it's survival. And if you're an educator, a leader, or a policymaker, Ask yourself how many more Matt Stetters will slip through unnoticed unless you build safety nets strong enough to hold not just their talent, but their humanity. Matt's name should not fade into a footnote, or an obituary tucked into a campus archive. It should ring out as a call to action, for better mental health systems, for communities that actually check on their brightest stars, and for a world that no longer confuses silence with stability. So here's what you can do, right now. Share Matt's story. Talk about mental health. Support organizations that bridge the gap between genius and vulnerability. And most of all, don't let another light dim because no one noticed it flickering. Because brilliance should never cost a life. And if we're willing to see the signs, to speak up, to show up, we can still save the next Matt before it's too late.